Well, good evening, Brennan, and welcome to the Lodge Hall for Karachi, number 337, and our 31st Zoom meeting as part of our lockdown lecture series. As ever, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines that requires you to have your video on. If you are having challenges with bandwidth, just send me a little message in the chat that you're switching your video off, and it would be good if you can remember your name and put your name in the box as well for the questions later on. Can I also ask you to sign the virtual tile within the Facebook page, Bren, please? That will give us a record of who's been with us at all of these meetings and keeps our brother secretary busy during his free time during the day. This evening, Bren, it's a great pleasure to have with us a Prestonian lecturer, the Prestonian lecturer from 2012, who will talk to us about Scouting and Freemasonry, two parallel organisations. Brother Tony Harvey was initiated into the Pioneer Lodge, the Scout Lodge for Derbyshire in 1991, and he's went on to become a past master of 4 lodges, including his mother lodge. He is a provincial office bearer in Derbyshire and is a wheel quaint face down in Englandshire, involved in lots of different stuff, particularly around communications and learning. And we very much hope this evening that we will all make our daily advancement in Masonic knowledge when we hear from Brother Tony and his Prestonian lecture. Tony, the floor is yours, sir.
Gordon, thank you, and brethren, thank you all. It's a great pleasure to be with you. This is the only the second time I've delivered my Prestonian lecture to a lodge in Scotland. The first was Fleur de Lis Lodge in Lanarkshire Middleward. So I'm absolutely delighted to get Gordon's invitation and to be with you. I just wondered why it's taken you 31 meetings really to get to me, but there we go. We shall see. I'm going to start, brethren, by sharing some slides with you just so that we can I'm sure you'd far rather see the slides than my face all of the time. So yes, the title of this lecture is Scouting and Freemasonry, Two Parallel Organisations, but please note the question mark at the end there. And as you've heard, my name's Tony Harvey. As well as being a Freemason, I'm a volunteer with the Scouts, and I've been an active member of that organisation since the age of 8. In this lecture, I'm going to look at the parallels between Scouting and Freemasonry. That's a ground pretty well trod, so I'm not going to leave it there. I'm going to go forward from there and look at the relationship that Scouting's founder, Robert Baden-Powell, had with Freemasonry, and the relationship that the two organisations have today, and most importantly, the opportunities for a mutually beneficial relationship in the future. Now, you will forgive me, my heritage and background is English Freemasonry, so that's the sort of start point from which I come. But I hope that a lot that I have to say will have resonance and relevance to a Scottish Freemasonry as well. Before I go too far, I really ought to pay tribute to Brother William Preston, who actually originally came from Aberdeen. He was the foremost Masonic educator of his age, and after whom the Prestonian Lectureship is named. The Prestonian Lectures are the only lectures held under the authority of the United Grand Lodge of England, and I believe it's the oldest Masonic lectureship in the world. Each year, a member is appointed to deliver a lecture on a Masonic topic of his own choosing to educate and entertain a general lodge audience. Gordon, I don't think this could be called a general lodge audience, but then for that matter, brethren, I don't think I've ever seen one, and I've taken this literally around the world. It's customary for the lecture to be printed in booklet form for sale, and the profits go to charities of the lecturer's choice, and that is true here, and I'll mention that later in case any of you want to buy a copy. So why did I choose the topic of Scouting and its relationship with Freemasonry? Brethren, I'm just going to ask you, could you, if you've ever been involved in Scouting, if you've ever taken the Scout Promise, can I just ask you to wave at me? Just wave at me if you've ever taken any form of the Scout Promise. I don't suppose there's too many former Beaver Scouts here, but there may have been a few Wolf Cubs, Cub Scouts, Scouts, Boy Scouts. So yeah, exactly. Keep waving, keep waving. Now, yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's It's almost everyone. There's probably one or two. Thank you. You can put it down now, Andrew. That's great. Probably almost everyone has on this call has been a scout. And that's absolutely typical, because wherever I take this, and this is the 124th time I've delivered this lecture. And as I say, I've delivered it all around the world. Everywhere I go, at least, and normally a lot more, at least 2/3 of Freemasons have at some point in their lives made the Scout promise. Now, there's got to be a reason for this. And for me, it begs the question, if so many Freemasons were once Scouts, I just wonder how many of today's Scouts might one day become Freemasons. Now, for those of you who were not Scouts, and incidentally, if you've made the Scout promise, you still are a Scout in my book. So for those of you who are not, I will just briefly introduce the founder of Scouting, Robert Baden-Powell. We often just refer to him as BP. Baden-Powell rose to fame after his defence of the town of Mafeking during the Anglo-Boer War. He was a boy's own hero who had introduced innovative small group techniques into army training, the forerunner really of special forces, I think. Having been asked to adapt these to offer to young people, he ran an experimental camp on Brownsea Island before publishing his book Scouting for Boys in 1908. Actually, it wasn't first published as a book. It was in 6 fortnightly parts. But this triggered the start of the world's largest youth organisation, which today numbers over 50 million current members in 171 countries. So let's look at the key parallels between Scouting and Freemasonry. I'm only going to be able to cover some. The rest of them are in the book, and who knows, you may have some others as well. And I'm also going to cover, brethren, just 3 differences. As I say, the rest of the parallels are covered in the book that accompanies the lecture. So the first and most important parallel is that both Scouting and Freemasonry, 2 values-based membership organisations, are built on exactly the same moral principles. They're expressed in both the Scout Promise and in Masonic ritual, although in very different language. But they come down to these 3 things. First of all, our faith and beliefs. Secondly, care for and service to others. And thirdly, how we approach or develop ourselves. Now, in order to become a member, you have to make a promise in order to join. And that is the case in both organisations. Now, it's not unique. Many organisations ask us to make a written promise or declaration. However, in both Scouting and Freemasonry, that promise is made in front of the members of the group we're about to join, whether that be with our hand on the flag at a meeting of a Scout troop, or with our hand on the volume of the Sacred Law at a meeting of the Lodge. Both organisations can be said to be uniformed. Here you will see the current uniform of the Scout section, which today is 11 to 14 years old. And on the right, of course, the apron of a Master Mason, at least under the English Constitution. Uniform is a way of showing our allegiance to an organisation. It shows that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, as well as a way of displaying our achievements, of course. And incidentally, if you doubt whether Freemasonry is uniformed, just ask the members of the public who live near to your Masonic Hall how they recognise Freemasons arriving for their lodge. Both Scouting and Freemasonry are open to people of all faiths. Scouting has never been a Christian organisation. Freemasonry originally was, of course, but it de-Christianised over the course of the 18th century. Both are also open to people of all political views, although in neither organisation are members permitted to promote political views when acting as members. These are the current leaders of the 2 main political parties in the United Kingdom. Now, whatever our personal opinions, in both Scouting and Freemasonry, we silence all political arguments. And incidentally, brethren, I check the news every morning just to see whether I have to change the photographs in this slide. Now, as a result of these last 2 parallels, both Scouting and Freemasonry quickly became international forces for good. They both bring together people of all nations and of goodwill, based on what they have in common and despite their other differences. Both Scouting and Freemasonry offer their members a system of progression. In Scouting, this is through a carefully structured and balanced program of activities leading to various badges and awards. In Freemasonry, this is by progressing through the offices in a lodge and by learning more and more about Freemasonry's precepts. The effect in both cases is the same. Our members grow in competence and confidence, becoming better people, better able to live meaningful lives and to make a contribution to the greater good. Now, another parallel, at least for those of us south of the border, is that both organisations share the same person as its titular head. Not only is His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, but since 1975 he's been the President of the Scout Association. Now, there is clearly a difference at this point, brethren, that I should make. We know that in Freemasonry we have different Grand Lodges for England and Wales, for Scotland and for Ireland. But the United Kingdom Scout Association covers England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Incidentally, going back to His Royal Highness here, he's not the first Royal Duke to hold both appointments at the same time. This here on the right is His Royal Highness the Duke of Connaught and Strathearn, who was Grand Master from 1901 until 1939. And he was also from 1913 the President of the Boy Scouts Association. As we shall see, he was also a very good friend of Baden-Powell. Now, my final parallel, brethren, is a very personal one. I was born into Scouting. My parents were both active members. My father was a Rover Scout and my mother a Lady Cub Master. Yeah, I'll say that again, a Lady Cub Master. Now, if her appointment puzzles you, please understand that wolf cubs in the 50s were considered far too young to have mistresses. My parents first met each other at a Scout event. Love blossomed, and some years later I was born. Now, all I ever wanted to do, brethren, was to be a Scout, and I joined as soon as I could. In fact, in the week of my 8th birthday. And I've been an active member ever since. Scouting has formed my values and provided me with the framework by which I live my life. At the age of 31, I became a Freemason. I was proposed by Scouting colleagues and I was initiated into a Scouting lodge. I, and all of those present who were so entitled, wore Scout uniform for the ceremony, which was held in Derbyshire's Scout Training Centre. I found in Freemasonry an organisation entirely compatible with Scouting, one which has helped me continue my development and clarify my purpose in life. Now, let's turn to the 3 key differences between Scouting and Freemasonry. My first is that Scouting exists primarily for the benefit of young people. We want to attract all young people and offer them skills for life. We accept all children, whatever their background or past behaviours. Freemasonry is fundamentally different. It is for mature adults who have already set their course in life. It offers no rehabilitation. It only seeks to make good people better. Then there are the girls. Robert Baden-Powell wrote Scouting for boys, yet Scouting today is a mixed organisation, offering the same opportunities to girls as well as boys. Here is my daughter Caroline, who also became a Scout at the earliest age possible, in her case at 6 years of age, and she's shown here with the Chief Scout, Bear Grylls, in 2001. The same too again in 2019. But Caroline's generation is not the first to be girls in Scouting. This is the Wolf Patrol here in the middle of the picture. All of them girls at the first Scout rally at Crystal Palace in 1909. When he saw them, Baden-Powell said, "Who the devil are you?" "We're the Wolf Patrol," came the sassy reply. You see, no one had told them they could not join. Baden-Powell himself was quite comfortable with girls in the Scouts. Indeed, in his original handwritten notes for his scheme, he wrote, "Might also be extended to the training of girls." However, his advisors suggested girls be offered something different. So Baden-Powell founded the Girl Guides with the help of his sister. Today, Girl Guiding continues as a very successful, separate, girl-only organisation. And incidentally, just to demonstrate, the Wolf Patrol were not the only early Girl Scouts. This is the Red Rose Patrol from Poole in Dorset. Brethren, my last difference is the difference between growth and decline. And this is where we get serious. All membership organisations go through cycles of peaks and troughs in membership. Freemasonry has had a declining membership in my country for almost 50 years. Scouting too has experienced the same. In the 1960s, Scouting made major changes to its organisation and programme just before I joined. And as a result, at the age of 60, I am too young to have ever been a Boy Scout. The organisation I joined was just called Scouts. In the 1990s, Scouting was again in decline, losing the equivalent of a county of 10,000 members each year. We knew we had to do something. We underwent a complete review of all aspects of Scouting. Thankfully, we retained the core, our fundamental purpose and values, unaltered. And as a result of the changes we made to our organisation, we have been growing ever since their implementation in 2003, with more young people now than ever, and twice as many members in the core teenage years than 10 years ago. And incidentally, this growth is not due to admitting girls, which we did a decade beforehand, and which now comprise around a quarter of Scouting's young members, in fact, 27%. Later in this lecture, I will explain something of the changes that Scouting made and how Freemasonry could learn from Scouting's experiences. Before then, I want to examine Robert Baden-Powell's relationship with with Freemasonry. The question that many people ask is, was Baden-Powell a Freemason? Did the founder of the Scout movement get his inspiration from Freemasonry? Brethren, if you examine his CV, it becomes quite clear that not only would he have been an excellent candidate, but with his interests, he would have found Freemasonry very, very enjoyable. However, I can confirm that Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of Scouting, was not a Freemason. No records exist of him being initiated in or attending any meetings of any lodge under the English, Scottish, or Irish constitutions. No one has come forward with any documentary evidence of his membership. His staff and his family have all confirmed he was not a member, and I know members of the family very well indeed. Now, if Robert Baden-Powell was not a Freemason, what did he think of the craft? From original research and examination of primary sources, I've uncovered a trail of contacts that Baden-Powell had with Freemasonry, and I believe I can answer that question. The trail starts back in Mafeking during the siege. At its start, on the 12th of October 1899, BP declared martial law, and he stopped all of the town's organisations from meeting, including its Masonic lodge, Austral Lodge, number 2534. The lodge remained closed for some months until February 1900, when BP gave permission for it to meet, even offering to design a commemorative jewel for the occasion. Incidentally, the picture here depicts those attending the first meeting under siege conditions, and the treasurer, Brother Edward Ross, reported that during the time the lodge was working, a volley of Mauser bullets fired into the town. Baden-Powell was close friends with a number of Freemasons, one of the best known being Rudyard Kipling. They first met at around the time Kipling was initiated into Hope and Perseverance Lodge in Lahore, and they remained close until Kipling's death in 1936. Kipling helped BP form the first younger section in Scouting, the Wolf Cubs, and his Jungle Book stories provided the allegorical basis for the section. A rather more senior Freemason was another of Baden-Powell's close friends. BP first met His Royal Highness the Duke of Connaught and Strathern, again in India, in the 1880s, when, as adjutant to the 13th Hussars, BP was assigned to look after the Duke, which he did with some enthusiasm. Later in 1906, by which time the Duke was both Grand Master and Inspector General of the Forces, and BP at this time was Inspector General of the Cavalry, they toured South Africa together. On the 1st of February that year, 1906, they were both in Mafeking, and after the Duke had visited Austral Lodge, he and BP dined together. Although BP did not record the conversation in his diaries, it's clear they discussed Freemasonry and the Lodge. The Duke was BP's choice to be the first president of the Boy Scouts Association, and such was their friendship that BP named his son after him, the first name being Arthur, although he was always known as Peter from the play Peter Pan. Very strong evidence of Baden-Powell's views of Freemasonry came from a letter sent to all lodges in the English Constitution, following meetings with our then Grand Secretary, Philip Colville Smith. It was 1921. It was not long after the Great War, and very shortly after the First World Jamboree. Scouting needed funds. In the letter, BP acknowledges a number of parallels between Scouting and Freemasonry, and he himself says, "Our principles are closely allied with those of the Freemason, being those of brotherhood and service." BP clearly thought well of Freemasonry. He just never joined. Some years later, whilst in Melbourne, Australia, BP visited the Masonic Hall where the world's first Scout Lodge, Baden-Powell Lodge number 488, was based. He signed the Lodge's Bible with an inscription that acknowledged the Lodge's good work. He must have thought well of us. Incidentally, the Lodge had been founded in 1929 by BP's later deputy and successor as Chief Scout, Lord Somers, who was Governor of Victoria and its Grand Master. And he had gained BP's express permission to name the Lodge after Baden-Powell. Now, many assumed that Baden-Powell was a Freemason. Among the congratulatory letters he received after Mafeking was relieved were two from Masonic authorities. This one from the District Grand Secretary of South Africa Western Division can be paraphrased as, "Dear Colonel Baden-Powell, we, the Freemasons of Cape Town, wish to congratulate you on the gallant job you did in beating those pesky Boers and restoring pride in the British Empire. We feel sure that you must be a Freemason, and so wish to invite you to a lodge meeting the next time you're in town, so that we may thank you personally. If, however, our information is incorrect and you are not a member of the craft, we still think you did a pretty good job." So, if Robert Baden-Powell thought so well of Freemasonry, why did he not become a Freemason? He often referred to his two lives. The first was as a very successful army officer, the second as the Chief Scout of the world. We know from correspondence that he had many opportunities to join the craft. He declined as Chief Scout because he feared that becoming a Freemason would cause a rift with Roman Catholic Scouts. Now, for me, this shows his sensitivity to his own membership and his concern to act in the best interests of his own organisation. What we don't know is why he didn't join the craft during his first life as an army officer. Personally, I believe it was for family reasons, but I will expand on this elsewhere. For now, I will just say that only one of his many accomplished brothers ever became a Freemason, and that was only around the time of their mother's death. However, I am very pleased to say that the present Lord Baden-Powell, the grandson of BP, is a Freemason. Michael, 4th Baron Baden-Powell, is a past master of Baden-Powell Lodge number 488 in Victoria, and is a past Grand Officer of the Grand Lodge of Victoria. In 2014, I proposed Michael as a joining member of the Lodge of Unity, Peace and Concord, number 316, which started life, incidentally, as the lodge for the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots, the Royal Regiment, and is now the installed Masters Lodge of the Kindred Lodges Association. So for the first time, we can say a descendant of Robert Baden-Powell, the holder of his titles at that, is an English Freemason. Now, if Baden-Powell if the first Lord Baden-Powell was not a Freemason, is it possible that those Freemasons who worked with him in the pioneering days of Scouting inspired the parallels between the two organisations? So in this section, I'm going to examine the part played by Masonic Scouters and also look at the Kindred Lodges Association, which is a group of lodges with a shared interest in youth work. Baden-Powell did not found Scouting on his own. Many others inspired, encouraged and supported him. Is it possible that some of these influenced the building of the parallels with Freemasonry? I've researched the key people who worked with BP in the early embryonic years of Scouting, and I list the key ones here. And it should be of no surprise that many were Freemasons. However, if you compare these two lists, what strikes me at least is that those who were Freemasons tend to be what we would call ambassadors today. They didn't work at the nitty-gritty end, they didn't roll their sleeves up. The people who camped with BP, toured with him, ran the office and were generally by his side, for the most part, fall into the second list, and they were not Freemasons. So my conclusion is that Freemasons were not responsible for creating these parallels. There is little or no Masonic DNA in Scouting as such. The parallels must be explained by deeper roots, going back to earlier times. We know, for instance, that BP's social conscience was developed at a young age, and that he had a fascination with orders of knighthood and chivalric codes. Whatever the origins of the parallels, they do exist, and many Freemasons have been Scouts, as we've seen tonight. Indeed, as we always say, once a Scout, always a Scout. Now, while Scouting was not formed by Freemasons, it's very clear that many Scouts have gone on to become Freemasons. One of the most well-known, of course, is Ralph Reeder, the Broadway producer and founder of the gang shows. He was active in 2 Scouting lodges. Years later, Jock Barr was responsible for re-energising the Venture Scout section, and he became a Freemason in the Scout Headquarters Lodge, which meets just down the road from Gilwell Park, Venture Lodge, which I'm proud to be a member of too. One who played a key part in my becoming a Freemason was Kim Gale. Kim was the first initiate of my mother lodge, and he was County Commissioner for Derbyshire and a very well-known Scout in his day. Now, inevitably, Masonic Scouters grouped together to form Scout lodges, and it wasn't long before the lodges themselves formed into a lodge association. The Kindred Lodges Association, or KLA, comprises almost 40 craft lodges in England, together with one in Scotland and some overseas. And we also have Royal Arch chapters and Mark lodges. Most of these are connected with Scouting, although a few are linked to the Boys Brigade and one to the cadet services. So this brings us from the origins of Scouting right up to the present day. What is the relationship between Scouting and Freemasonry now? Well, I believe I've established that the two organisations do have a shared purpose, the same values, and a good number of members in common. But as membership organisations, they also face the same challenges in the 21st century. Those challenges are concerned with how we function as organisations rather than our values or deeper meaning. So, for example, what does the public understand us to be? How do we compete, yes, compete for members' time and energy when they have so many other options available to them? How do we attract, introduce and retain new members? And how do we communicate with them, support them and encourage good practice? How do we organise ourselves to provide this support? And how do what we do when our membership units, be they Scout groups or Masonic lodges, become unviable? What do we do then? And how do we encourage them to evolve, change, move, or even, if appropriate, close? Now, as I mentioned earlier, Scouting has already and continues to address these issues. Back in the 1990s, when it was in severe decline, it undertook a root and branch review of everything. There were no sacred cows. Everything was challenged, tested, examined. We consulted all of our members and external interested parties. And the results were a confirmation that the core meaning of Scouting its fundamental values and principles must continue unaltered. But everything else, the organisational parts, needed modernisation. So we revitalised the youth programme, as a result of which Scouting has grown. In the language of young people, it's become cool, and more young people are seeking to join. We changed the offer for adults too. We introduced better recruitment and leadership training processes. We changed the culture of local and central support, so it now works to meet the needs of those delivering Scouting in local Scout groups. Today, the Scouts is a modern and relevant organisation with a vibrant public image. It also has a highly respected and innovative leader in the charity and volunteer sector. Now, Freemasonry has supported Scouting in its change process. In 2008, one of United Grand Lodge of England's central charities, the then Grand Charity, made a major grant to the Scout Association to fund its programme to open new Scout groups and grow local provision. In 2015, another of the English Masonic charities, the Royal Masonic Trust for Girls and Boys, followed this with a further grant targeted at starting Scouting in the 200 most deprived communities in England and Wales. But this relationship is two-way. Scouting has also supported Freemasonry. And one recent example, which came about since I started giving this lecture, is how Scouting inspired the Members' Pathway. The Members' Pathway is a toolkit for lodges. It provides them with the practical guidance to attract, introduce, and retain new members. It was inspired by Scouting's Adult in Scouting model, which brings together in one complete package the means to recruit, induct, train, and manage Scouting's adult volunteers. I came up with the idea for the Members' Pathway, and I've been working on it on behalf of UGLE and with their working groups for the last 6 years. The Kindred Lodges Association has also played its part in developing the relationship. It's engaged with Scouting and Masonic authorities at all levels to encourage collaboration and the sharing of ideas and experiences. It has also supported many Scouting projects, especially in connection with Scouting's heritage. I act as the Kindred Lodges liaison with both the Scout Association and the United Grand Lodge of England. Now, locally, there are many examples of collaboration. This scene would be very familiar to English Freemasons. It's a meeting in the Grand Temple at Freemasons Hall in London. Now, if you look closely, you will see that the people lined to the north and south of the pavement, where you would normally expect to see Grand Stewards in their crimson or red regalia, are not Grand Stewards at all. This is a meeting of Metropolitan Grand Lodge of London, and the brethren are receiving a presentation from London Scouts. And that's exactly who you see down the sides, along both sides of the squared pavement, and on the dais there in front of the Grand Master's throne. In Worcestershire, we have a Scout Lodge, the Pathfinder Lodge, which works in partnership with others to provide the administrative backup for the On-Away Scout and Guide Group. It's an innovative scheme that provides scouting and guiding to inpatients of the Birmingham Children's Hospital. The Lodge Secretary is also the Group Secretary. The Lodge Treasurer is also the Group Treasurer. And the Master chairs the Group Executive and Trustees. Overseas, relations between the two organisations are also developing. The very first Scouting Lodge, Baden-Powell Lodge in Melbourne, Victoria, has an annual event for Rover Scouts at which it presents an award for community service. This copy of their local newsletter shows the Grand Master of Victoria in the centre there in his full dress Masonic regalia, worn over his Scout uniform. So, having brought us to the present day, I now want to look to the future. What is my vision for the future relationship of the two organisations? And what are the opportunities for both? Now, since 2008, I've been meeting regularly with the chief executives of both the Scouts and United Grand Lodge of England. The three of us have lunch together around twice a year. Now, the current chief executive of the Scout Association, Matt Hyde, appreciates the valuable support that Freemasonry has given to Scouting and wants to work with us in the future. The Grand Secretary and Chief Executive of UGLE, Dr. David Staples, recognises that Scouting and Freemasonry are built on the very same values, and he fully supports the sharing of our challenges, ideas and experiences. And incidentally, brethren, so far I think I'm on my second Chief Executive of the Scouts and my third Grand Secretary insofar as these meetings and lunches are concerned. And it's not only the lunches, it's the communications between hand, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. So how can we help each other? Well, building this relationship has support from the highest level of both organisations, at least south of the border. So what does it mean in practice? How can we help each other? Well, first, I would encourage all Scouts and Freemasons to work at building local relationships. And I've written a document called Creating Local Connections to guide people through this process. It's available on my website. The real opportunity is to share experiences of running a membership organisation, be it a lodge, province, or national level, as well as ideas for the future. And it's amazing how useful an external perspective can be. Then we have the incredible resource of the practical and professional skills that we have developed and which could be of real benefit to Scouting, whether it be as auditors, electricians, mechanics, solicitors, investment advisors, photographers. The list is endless. And of course, our buildings can be are great community resources. Scouting would love to have access for committee meetings, training courses. How about for award nights to create an Oscar experience for young people? I wouldn't suggest though for troop night meetings and ball games, etc. Most importantly, if we are open to learn from each other, we will find many ways to help each other. So this brings me to what salespeople would call the ask, and the marketing people would call my vision. So what if every provincial Grand Master met with and got to know their local Scouting opposite number, which in Scotland would be the area commissioner, to share ideas and experiences regularly? What if every Scout group, which started as a result of the grants from the Grand Charity and the RMTGB, were contacted by a local lodge to offer assistance, not money, but practical support? And what if every Freemason, whoever made the Scout promise, gave just one evening a year of their time and skills to local Scouting? There's far more that we can do without having to sign up as a Scout leader and get a warrant. So to summarize my lecture, I think I've established that, first of all, there were both traditional and contemporary parallels between Scouting and Freemasonry. And while some Freemasons had a role in the early years of Scouting, Scouting was certainly not born out of Freemasonry or out of Masonic thinking. Many of today's Freemasons were once Scouts, and Freemasonry could be very attractive to today's Scouts if they know about it. But most importantly, both Scouting and Freemasonry can surely only benefit from a current understanding of what each organisation is today, not yesterday, and from building local collaborative relationships. Now, brethren, as I mentioned earlier, it is customary for Prestonian lecturers to produce a book to form of their lecture to sell in aid of their chosen charities. And for those of you who want to know more, you can buy the book associated with my lecture. It goes into rather more detail than the oral lecture here, and it's available from my website. It costs £10 plus postage and packing, and all proceeds are split equally between my two charities. And you can use my website to contact me for further information. My two charities are, first of all, the Scout Association's Heritage Fund, which exists to educate people about Scouting and its history, and which is currently working to establish and build the UK's National Museum of Scouting. The second charity is the Masonic Charitable Foundation, which is attached or connected with United Grand Lodge of England. So any money that people donate tonight or buy books from tonight will go to the first charity only, the Scouts, which of course is UK-wide. Now, occasionally some people want to see if they can do more to support Scouting, and especially Gilwell Park, which is the spiritual home of the worldwide Scout movement. And if that's the case, you may be interested in becoming what is known as a Gilwell Fellow. Just contact me directly for any more details. Finally, may I just thank you for your interest in the subject, for inviting me along to deliver this lecture to you, but most importantly for what you're going to do in the future to help build this relationship between Scouting and Freemasonry. And with that in mind, it's back to you, Gordon, for questions on the subject. And I'm looking forward to hopefully many of them.
Brother Tony Harvey, on behalf of the members of the Lodge Hope of Cratchie and all our visitors here this evening, can I thank you on a very interesting presentation on our two organisations. And I do say our because I was a member of the 25th Fife Mark Inch back in the day, maybe not as far back as Alistair Marshall goes, but I was certainly a member of the Scouting organisation. There was a couple of things that I picked up within it, Tony, that connects this series of lectures as well. There was two people that you mentioned. One was Brother Lord Roberts, VC. We've heard about
Yes.
Brother Lord Roberts in one of the previous lockdown lectures. And the other brother was another military chap, Brother Lord Kitchener. And
yes,
next week we have a presentation about Lord Kitchener. So Grant, that's
okay.
a quick plug for you, but it ties it all together. You see, so
they were both Grand Wardens in the United Grand Lodge of England, and Lord Roberts, or Bobs as he was known, was quite close to Baden-Powell. They didn't always see eye to eye. Lord Roberts was Baden-Powell's commanding officer during the Boer War and for a number of other campaigns.
Okay. So going through the chat, Brent, I think there's a couple of questions. Just let me scroll down. Although a comment from David Weems, although not a Scout myself, both of my sons have been involved with the organisation. My younger son went on to become a Queen's Scout and a leader. Both have gone on to become past masters of their mother lodge.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, David. I mean, you know, yet another example of how Scouting has often led into Masonry, or people who are in Scouting find something that resonates in Freemasonry. Do you mind if I just say at this point, Gordon, David, you mentioned being a Queen Scout, and somebody mentioned earlier, and they said, I was a Queen Scout. I'm going to correct you, brother. You are a Queen Scout. You have a royal warrant, and it confers a status upon you, rather like becoming a Freemason. Once you're a Freemason for life. And when you become a Queen Scout, you become a Queen Scout for life. So just a little thing there. I hope we can all feel good about that, those of us who are Queen Scouts.
There's a question from David Brown, Tony. It's relating to Scotland primarily, and it's a question to the whole group. But there is a group in Ballater called the Ballater Young Masons, and there's some famous photographs that are shared around with them parading. And David's asking, does anyone know anything about the Ballater Young Masons? If you've not heard of them, Tony, that's fine. We can take it back to the Facebook chat later on. Because I think there is a nice connection between them and the Scouts as a uniformed organisation.
Well, Gordon and David, first of all, I haven't heard of them. So I've learned something tonight, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm often asked by people when I deliver this talk, whether or not I see any formal link between the two organisations. And quite often what people are really after, what they want to do is take Scouts when they get to a point where they leave the training sections and get them into Freemasonry. And I always explain to people, why would a membership organisation want people to leave their organisation to join another? Because what the Scouts want is for their young people to stay in Scouts and become leaders. So the next question that people then ask is, well, do you see a role for a Masonic cadet section? You know, a sort of a youth Masonry. And of course, in the United States, there is Demole, which seems to work there. And my answer to that question has always been, I don't think it really fits our culture, and I don't think it would really, I don't think it would somehow be acceptable to the wider British public. Now, what you're telling me about the Ballater Young Masons, it's the first I've heard of them. I'd love to know more. I really would. So whoever can help me with this, and either directly to me or through Gordon, I'd love to know more, you know, something that I can read up on. So thank you for that. And who knows, there may be somebody later on the call who can help us.
Yeah, that will certainly be a chat on the Facebook at some point.
Can I just say, Gordon, at this point, and Tony, thanks very much for that. Derek Elder has actually privately via chat sent me a very interesting internet link, which I'll look at once this session's over.
Thank you.
Derek might like to just share that generally.
Okay.
That's good.
Thank you very much, David.
And thank you, Derek. You're a wealth of knowledge as ever. It's amazing that he's got stored away on his computer. Jim Reeves, who you were talking to earlier, Tony, has a question and a point. Jim Reeves, could the fact that Freemasons do not appear in uniform, whereas Scouts do, have a bearing on the public perception of each organisation?
Jim, that's a fantastic. Whereabouts are you, Jim? Can you just wave at me so I know where you are? Hi, Jim. Yes. It's a fantastic question. The 2009 Prestonian lecturer, a good friend of mine, John Wade, his Prestonian lecture was all about Masonic processions, dating right back to the 1730s, and he demonstrated that Masonic processions have until the 20th century have been a big part of Freemasonry. It was only really in the 1930s. Now, obviously, again, we're talking about English Freemasonry, so forgive me, brethren, if this isn't part of the culture in the Grand Lodge of Scotland. We're seeing a resurgence or the revival of the wearing of regalia on public occasions. It has to be with permission. And certainly across our history, when people have done it without permission, they've got into deep water, including, incidentally, William Preston. So it's something that has happened throughout our history. But of course, you don't see it quite so much, perhaps, as you might see Scouts in uniform. Personally, I don't think it's the biggest issue that contributes to the public perception of Freemasonry. I think there are much bigger issues, and the perception of secrecy and our perceived openness, particularly at the end of the 20th century. So it may be a small factor. It would be wrong to suggest that Freemasonry has never appeared in public in its so-called uniform. But I don't think it's a major factor, not as important as some other issues. Thanks for the question, Jim.
Thank you, Tony. I've got a comment, and I'm going to ask Aubrey to come in at this stage, Tony. He's got a comment. Aubrey lives in Chile.
Oh, good.
I do indeed. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Tony. Most interesting. I do live in Chile. I've been out here for 30 years. And I would like to say that Scouting is very active in Chile for a start. But the most significant part for me, which I think is applicable to your lecture, was about 7 years ago. The Grand Lodge of Chile had a new Grandmaster, my apologies, they don't have the Mason on the end, Grandmaster called Luis Riveros. He was this distinguished university person, and he actively started to promote Scouting within the Grand Lodge of Chile. And I said to him, why are you doing this? I was involved in quite a lot in those days, although I'm Grand Lodge of Scotland. But I said to him, why are you doing this? He said, we have the same ideals.
Perhaps you've got a copy of my book, Aubrey.
Could be, I don't know. Could be. But the important thing is from then, I'm talking about probably 8 years, about 7 years ago, it's spread. And lodges now, there's a lodge here where I live, Grand Lodge of Chile Lodge where I live, are now actively pushing for a scout group within their lodge.
Yes,
To support.
Yes, I'm in contact with quite a few lodges in South America, particularly in Brazil and Argentina, that have close connections with scouting. And I'm hoping to make when we get out of this dreaded COVID situation, I'm hoping to do a speaking tour in South America. We have, as well as the Grand Lodge of Scotland there, we have English districts, and I'm in contact with people there. Aubrey, maybe this is something we could pick up offline and talk about, because if I am coming over there, I'd love to have the opportunity to meet in Chile and find out more about what you're telling us.
By all means,
Fantastic.
Someone coordinate it.
I'll connect Aubrey with Tony.
Gordon knows my details.
That would be lovely. Thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you for that. A question from Pastmaster Ron Mann of Dunern 400. On the one hand, the correlation between each group seems worthy and practical. However, could it also be seen as us trying to recruit scouts to Freemasonry? Ron, thank you for that. Where are you, Ron? Give me a wave. Thank you, Ron. Do you know, one word I never use in this context is the R word. And I make it absolutely clear to Freemasons when we're engaging with scouts that they must not use that word. I have worked very hard, and others with me, I'm not claiming credit on my own, but I've been the spearhead on behalf of the Kindred Lodges Association, here at least. We've worked very hard to build a relationship of trust. And the issue of us seeing, or the idea of us seeing scouts as an easy target for recruitment has never been communicated to the scouts. Now, they're not stupid. They're very, very smart. I mean, you know, I work closely with the guys who run the scout movement, and they're smart people. And of course, they know that many scouts do go on to become Freemasons. And in fact, many Freemasons have got more involved in scouting as a result of this work. So there's been mutual benefit. But I have always been very, very clear to Freemasons that we should not enter into this relationship on the basis of short-term gain for our lodges. And bear in mind that if they overstep that mark, they could do more damage than good. Now, I'll go a step further, and I could go a lot further than what I'm about to say, but I want to keep within the bounds of this subject. I don't believe the word recruit is appropriate within Freemasonry. I think what we've got to do in Freemasonry is to attract members and draw them to us. I don't think we do that by going out and trying to persuade people to take the king's shilling, as it were. So in my work to develop the members' pathway for United Grand Lodge of England, in all of that work, we don't use the word recruit. We talk about attracting, introducing, and retaining brethren. And our biggest challenge, I haven't looked at the data for the Grand Lodge of Scotland, so I don't know. But I can tell you that our biggest issue in the United Grand Lodge of England is not finding new members, it's keeping them. Because every year we initiate something around about 8,000 new brethren, and every year 11,000 leave. So if we can solve, it's the problem of the leaky bucket. If we can fix the leaky bucket before we start pouring water in. So, you know, that's another reason, Ron, why we don't approach scouts with this sort of short-term attempt to try to recruit people to patch up our struggling lodges. But thank you for an excellent question. Thank you, Tony, for that. I do like your statement, attract, not recruit. Good, thank you. David Hamilton, if I get my acronyms right, a former Assistant Area Commissioner with the Venture Scouts. With scouting being organised across the UK, are there any similar initiatives being considered in Scotland? This would have been invaluable back in the day, and I can see the benefit to modern scouting. David, I can see you there. I've just given you a wave. David, I would, as far as I'm aware, there are not. Now, you know, we're all Freemasons. We know the protocols about Freemasonry. I'm not a member of the Grand Lodge of Scotland.
I would love, absolutely love, to be able to work with brethren from the Grand Lodge of Scotland to develop the relationship with Scouting, sorry, the relationship between Freemasonry and Scouting north of the border. And if there's opportunities for that, brethren, and if anybody on this call can make that happen, I would very much like to work with people, because I can provide the introduction into Scouting. I can share what we're doing here in England, England and Wales, and we can work together. Scouting is fully aware that how Freemasonry is organised, and is fully aware that I liaise with them through something which is essentially English Freemasonry. It would be absolutely fantastic if I could sit down with the Scouts and with the Chief Executive in particular, and the UK Chief Commissioner, with somebody who is, if you like, is my twin brother from the Grand Lodge of Scotland. That would work absolutely. And you know, if we could open up some channel to do that. Incidentally, we've tried doing the same thing with the Boys Brigade, and one of our difficulties, I've been meeting with the Secretary General of the Boys Brigade. One of the difficulties with the Boys Brigade is it is a declining organisation. It's much stronger in Scotland than it is down here. And we can't find anybody to do the job that I do who's got the clout in the Boys Brigade and the credibility in the Boys Brigade that, if you like, I have in the Scouts. So that's another opportunity and challenge. And if anybody's got any thoughts and suggestions about that, again, please get in touch with me.
Well, Tony, I certainly, we've got a few brethren on this presentation this evening that are very well connected in George Street, and I do know that the new Grand Secretary regularly watches our Zoom meetings that are on our YouTube channel, so I'm sure that offer will get back to him.
Fantastic.
We've got a lot of comments about the presentation being excellent and very informative. Ian McIntosh is reminiscing about receiving his wood badge at Gilwell at some point. I won't say what decade Ian says. Joseph Roderick says he was a Sea Scout while at school, and my immediate past at Lodge Hope of Karachi, he's a leader in the 49th Fife Sea Scouts. And he went on to be the chairman of the group, and both his children were members.
Fantastic.
So, Tim Tierney, I've often used the comparison between the two organisations to try to explain to people what Freemasonry is. I say Freemasonry is a bit like Scouts for adults. Do you have any further suggestions to add to that to make Masonry more appealing to new members?
When you say make Masonry more appealing to new members, Tim, sorry, Tim, can you again wave at me? I always like to see the people I'm speaking to. Whereabouts are you? Can't quite see you.
I think he's on one of
the... right, got you. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, thank you.
I'm definitely waving.
Do I have any suggestions to add to that to make more appealing to new members? When you say new members, do you mean people who've already committed or already are Freemasons?
No, people that are, you know, may have a passion interest, but yeah, you know, but require a bit more information.
Yes, I mean, well, one of the things we
comparison effectively, and I'm finding that's the only thing really that I can explain to people that they're likely to know what Masonry is about, as a, you know, compared to something that they've already experienced or probably experienced in life.
Yes. One of the things we do down here quite a lot are sort of open days, or what sometimes what we call white table events, where we have a lodge meeting, but it's normally a fairly brief lodge meeting, and we then invite non-Masonic guests and their families along, and we do a talk. And I quite often do a Scouting flavoured one of those. I've given this talk, or a version of this talk, to a number of Scout audiences as well. In fact, every year, and some of you may remember the Gilwell reunion, I've been going to the Gilwell reunion every year since 1984. This year it was a virtual event, and for the last few years the Kindred Lodges Association has had a stand at the Gilwell reunion. Gilwell reunion is an adult sort of refresher weekend event, and so we talk to people a lot there. And on this occasion, I did a talk for Scouts about Freemasonry. And that talk is on my YouTube channel. So there's resources like that that you can get hold of if you wish. If you look at my YouTube channel, Worshipful Brother Tony Harvey, there's this talk on there, and there's a couple of other scouting orientated ones. There's the book as well, and there's some other handouts and documents. I think the other thing to do is put them in touch with scouting lodges. So you've got Fleur-de-Lis in Lanarkshire mid-province, and we've got a lot south of the border. And if you look at the Kindred Lodges Association website, there's and I'll put that in the chat area, incidentally. There's lots of contacts in there that you can make and find out what they've been doing locally to support scouting, and there's lots of examples of how they've been developing local relationships, and all of those examples have got stories to tell about how scouts have been working with Freemasonry. I'll give you one example. In Bedfordshire at the moment, the Freemasons are paying for the building of a new accommodation block at their county campsite. And that has meant there's been quite a lot of to and froing involvement from the province and the local scout county with various events and activities. And that's another thing that I encourage for us as in Freemasonry to invite scouts to any public event we have, whatever that might be, whether it be a church service or an open day. And I encourage the scouts to invite us to their AGMs and those sort of events. So the more we can put people in contact with each other, the more they can exchange experiences. So it's taking the people that you're talking about, Tim, and putting them into those sorts of situations. I certainly know that a number of people have found the book that, I know I keep plugging it, but forgive me, brethren, every author's got a right to plug his books. I know that this has been quite influential in a number of people with an interest in scouting, in if you like, tipping the balance for them joining the craft. So, you know, you might want to get hold of a copy of that and see whether that can be of help. I hope that's of some use, Tim. There's a number of different avenues to explore there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for that answer, Tony. A couple of other comments and questions. Derek Elders put in the chat the bit about the Ballater Little Masons Parade, but we'll also give a little nod to Derek as a former Chief Scout Award holder from the 34th Glasgow.
Wonderful.
Alistair Marshall, excellent, Tony, without a doubt. In spite of you being a scout, he must have been in the BBs then, Alistair's background. He's now a widow's son.
And Derek Elder's correcting me, and he's absolutely correct, and I do apologise. That was a slip of the tongue. I've been doing a lot of work at the moment on Anderson, who, as you quite rightly say, was Aberdeen, and Preston, of course, was Edinburgh. So I do apologise. Thank you.
Andy Beebe, congratulations on a great lecture. I've enjoyed it very much. I'm currently working on a scouting lodge and pathway for a district in Brazil. I'm of Scottish descent. Well, Andy, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, no matter where you go in the world.
Well, Andy's been on some other talks of mine, and recently got the book, I think, Andy. So I hope you're reading it, and I hope you're not falling asleep while you're doing it.
Tony, a comment from Tom Edgar, a man who wears a uniform of such in his day job as one of Edinburgh's city officers. I was always led to believe that both the BBs and the Scouts were the first step to becoming a Freemason. I was a BB when I was a boy.
Well, the founder of the BB, of course, was a good friend of Robert Baden-Powell, and Robert Baden-Powell became a vice president of the BB and actually offered General Smith the scheme, and he didn't want it at the time. I mean, they had quite a discussion. I mean, some people say, you know, Smith turned it down, and others say BP turned it down. I suspect the real truth will never be known, but they at least were good friends. So yes, there are a lot of similarities between the two organisations, absolutely. Okay. And I'm an associate member of the BB, just to keep an eye on them.
Brother Manuel Carrasco, you've put a comment in, is this lecture from the Lodge Hope of Karachi number 337, does it have an amity number associated? I'm afraid I don't know what an amity number is. If you can drop me a message in the chat, I would say we don't, because we're just a wee lodge for Fife and Kinross trying to do our best and bring fantastic speakers to you. But we'd be interested in hearing more about that. Excellent thought-provoking
Me too.
lecture.
I'd like to know as well.
In our area, the main avenue of progression was from local BB companies into the local lodges. Super lecture. Hope Grand Lodge of Scotland will take up the gauntlet. Yeah.
Right.
Current master. Share a property with a local scout group. We assist each other on a regular basis, and in the lodge help when we can. That's Robert Macaulay. And Alistair Marshall, who's a Lance Corporal Marshal in the 4th Grangemouth BBs. There you go.
Fantastic.
Now, if you've ever seen Dad's Army, the first series, that'll give you an idea about Alistair Marshall. Well, Tony, once again, on behalf of the members of Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our visitors here this evening, can I thank you for your presentation this evening on the parallels of Scouting and Freemasonry, but more importantly, sir, can I thank you for your efforts in supporting the Scouting movement all your days, and in particular, since doing this Prestonian lecture, I believe you've raised over £80,000 for your chosen charities, and that itself is very commendable, and I'm sure the Brethren would echo my sentiment there to you, Tony.
Thank you, Gordon. That's most kind. Can I've just put into the chat area my own website where you can get access to a lot of other resources and also contact me. And I've also uploaded the bit.ly short link for my donations page, my fundraising page, if that's all right with you, Gordon.
Yeah,
I know we talked about it
problem.
But thank you for your warm welcome and for this wonderful audience.
No, thank you, Tony. Brian, as ever, we will continue the discussion on our Facebook pages, and please, all you former scouts, or we're all still scouts, please get involved in the chat. Next week, Brian, we look forward to Brother Grant MacLeod, a name known to many of you, and he's going to come and talk to us about Brother Lord Kitchener. So we're bringing it back home, and we look forward to hearing that. As ever, Brian, I will open the mics to you all so you can say your good evenings and your thank yous to Tony, and you'll have a minute or so to do that, and then I'll give us our final countdown. The floor's everyone's.
Well done, Tony. Thanks very much. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. Excellent.
Thank you, David. That's most kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you.
It was very
Thank you, brethren.
I'm going to say
Very
good
good,
night.
Tony. Thanks very much.
Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm
Thank you.
most kind. Thanks for coming
Appreciate
along.
that.
Thanks for inviting me.
Take care of yourselves, and as another man from the Midlands, I'll say I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thank you, Tim.
No worries. Take care of yourselves. Good night, everyone.
Most enjoyable, Tony.
Thank you, Jim. Nice to talk with you earlier too.
And Tony, a super talk.
Talk again.
There's food for much thought.
Alan, that's exactly what I want. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you. Most kind.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Tony.
very much, Tony.
Thank you,
We'll be
Claudia.
in contact.
Excellent. That's what I want. Please get in touch, and let's see whether we can develop this this relationship for all of our good. Really.
Thanks very much, Tony.
Very good.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, sir. Ian Smith. Hello, Ian.
This is the 4th time I've heard this, Tony. It's been excellent.
Oh, well, it's different every time, Ian.
Only slightly. But it was excellent. Thank
It's
you.
the way I tell them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your support, Ian.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to give you 5, 4, just to show to you, Laird Allen, that I can count. 3, 2,
Good night.
1. Good night, Brian. Thank you very